Hi, HR Nation. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives in the world leading global brands. Today, we have a very special guest on the show. We're joined by Justin McSharry, who's a global head of learning and leadership development at DropBox. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Is that background a reflection of how the weather is, or not so cold where you are right now?
It actually is quite cold where I am. I'm currently in Vancouver, BC, temporarily. I'm normally based out of San Francisco, Burlingame, technically, in the Bay Area.
Definitely beautiful. Before we go any further, tell everyone a little bit more about yourself personally and your kind of background and journey to where you are now at DropBox.
Sure. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I was a senior in high school. I just knew that, my dad was an electrical engineer. He seemed to have a pretty good job. My parents wanted me to go to college and, get a good job so I can live the American dream, right? The house with the
Picket fence.
Yeah. And a dog. So I was decent in math and science. So I joined university to do electrical engineering. Ended up getting the degree, did engineering for about a year and a half before I realized that I was bored being stuck behind a computer all day and wanted more people interaction. I was at the time working in the East Bay of San Francisco area. My good friend was working in Silicon Valley in San Jose as an electronics semiconductor distributor. So I ended up taking a job as like the tech guy who travels with the salespeople. And so it was like sort of my first customer facing job. Learned a ton. There were parts of it that I loved. Decided I wanted to kind of control my own destiny. And I went full fledged into a full-time sales role. And I did sales for about 12 years.
Why sales? Right? Just out of curiosity, is it because you saw the role that those salespeople had and it just fascinated you being on the road and seeing the interaction with customers? Or was it just something else that really drew your attention?
It was a few things. I was sort of like trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted out of life, basically. I was in my 20s. On one hand, I wanted to make as much money as possible. I saw people around me making a lot of money. I felt like that was an aspiration, and I didn't at the time know maybe that it wouldn't make me happy. So this was before L&D. So I started my career in 1998 in the working world, and so this was kind of L&D was early days. I didn't realize you could actually have a job as a corporate learning person and make a decent career out of it. So I sought out to really find that out, and I started as a sales trainer because I could leverage my
That's what
sales
you know, right? Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I knew, and I could get in and sort of like learn how to train and facilitate, and did that for about 5 years. And then at that company, they ended up combining the sales training team with the learning and development team. As our chief people officer put it at the time, she said, everybody's getting sales enablement. We want to enable everybody.
Because it's interesting, by the way, most companies, when it comes to learning development, it always starts with sales. Right. It starts with like when they start a function. That's from my experience. I don't know, maybe you can tell me different, but every role I've joined, like learning development is like so sales heavy and orientated. And then, oh, by the way, we'll also do some training for the other parts of the organization.
I think especially in early stage companies, founders or CEOs are willing, they're sort of like, I'll pay for a training team as long as it's directly tied to revenue.
You can measure it very
exactly.
easy. Yeah.
Measure it. It's sort of like less risky to spend money on it. And it starts that way, to your point. And then there's like, they hire the one L&D person who's like juggling a million things and trying to pull it all together. And, so that's typical. And then, but we had the luxury of, we had a fairly good sized sales training team, like 10 or 12 people for a company of 700 people. So we were able to combine forces, and I ended up leading that team. So that was my sort of like final sort of like foray into L&D. And then what I realized out of that is I really love leadership and executive development, because I feel like that has a strong impact in organizations. And so that's even though I'm the learning and leadership development head, I've focused a lot of my efforts in leadership and executive development.
Mm-hmm. And here you are today. How long have you been with DropBox?
Been DropBox about a year and a half, a little over like a year and 10 months or so.
Mm-hmm. What was it that drew you to the business?
Well, I really love Dropbox's product. I mean, they've got a great product. I always love the user interface and the way it just
use
works.
it.
It's just a full. No, thank you.
It just works. It just works. Like, when you have a product where it just works, and you don't have to. No one has to tell you how to use it, or it just works.
Intuitive, exactly right. And so I've always loved the product. And now we've evolved into collaboration, and we're getting into new spaces now. And then I really love the culture, the people. it's a very people-centric organization, almost like next level compared to, I've been in organizations that are very friendly and people-centric, but this one, it almost feels like family. It's a very special environment. And
What makes a company, a people-centric organization in your mind?
it's all starts with the founders, I think, and the CEO truly caring about people and just being focused around wanting to treat employees well. In our case, it's not only, I mean, really beautiful office spaces that we haven't been able to see for a while, and like all the free food that, the like Silicon Valley perks that you hear about, but a little more than that, like a really special work experience and the environment at the office where people just like going there, and everybody's at lunch together, like sort of like socializing and building friendships. And so I think that starts again with the founders, and with then the rest of the people that get hired. You end up just it's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You end up hiring a lot of people who are also friendly and who are just warm and very smart, hardworking people at the same time. One of the downsides, though, is I was like, you get so friendly that nobody can have hard conversations, and nobody
Oh,
wants
that's
to
a
give.
that's.
Like,
I was thinking about that, by the way, when you were saying that, because that is actually something that makes it. Even me, I've been that leader where I kind of build such strong bonds and relationships, even with my current team, that sometimes is tough to have that conversation. But slowly, we built a culture where we spoke about this before the show, where we understand that actually we're doing ourselves a disservice by not having those conversations. And in fact, it's in the best interest for everyone to have it. It's not personal. And if we're not having that, we're actually holding ourselves back. It's a quite a big shift though to get to that point. Thinking about the future of work, obviously, it's kind of shifted massively over the last 8 months for everyone. And now, if I'm correct, you're kind of going virtual first in your approach. Why did you make that decision? Obviously, to someone that's obvious, but what does that mean for learning at Dropbox?
yeah. Well, the CEO and his staff, what we call staff, really looked at, once COVID hit, about what's the future of our business, what's the future of our product strategy, what's the future of our people strategy. And what they found is our product is evolving, and to help distributed teams work and collaborate and be effective. Our missions to create an enlightened way of working. We're always like sort of like jostling between different apps to, I got to go find, I got my inbox here and my chat feature over there, and you're sort of bouncing around trying to find files and trying to collaborate, and there's like a lot of work about work and friction in that process. So we want to sort of try to enable a more seamless way of working there. And so our product ties right into that. And what we realized during work from home is that we have this opportunity to really test this on ourselves, to be sort of like, eat our own caviar, as a chief marketing officer that I used to work with like to say. Engineers would say dog fooding, but we have this opportunity to really like test out this distributed work product and environment. That's one obvious reason why we're going virtual first. Another is that we want to level the playing field. It's typical that the people who get promoted quicker are at headquarters, and we want to create an opportunity for all distributed employees to have equal access to promotion and visibility, and we hope that it solves that. It also turns out that we're able to maintain a lot of productivity. Like productivity really hasn't dipped, and we've been able to make this all work. Zoom fatigue, at the same time, as we all know, is very real.
We are just talking about that in my last call. Yeah, just because productivity is high, but what is that? That you can look at that data set, but what's the toll that's taking on people?
That's a very real thing. People are lonely. People feel isolated. Caregivers are really, really struggling. I mean, we were talking about how we're dealing with our kids and school and everything. So that's all real. So what virtual first is that the primary experience of all Dropboxers is going to be virtual, but we'll also have access to office space, what we're going to call Dropbox studios.
More collaboration spaces as opposed to where you go to do work.
It's not the traditional space that you would have a seat, like a reserved desk that you'd go to, but it's more around collaboration, ideation, and sort of like working spaces to enable productivity and social gathering. So we're going to maintain, for example, we have this cafe that we're all very proud of called Little R, and that's the nickname for our cafe. So we're going to have like, coffee spaces and some in our main Dropbox studios. places for people to gather. And we're also going to have conference rooms, ideation, collaboration rooms. We're going to have training facilities, which I'm very happy to hear.
I'm sure you're pretty excited about that.
Very excited about that piece. So we have this opportunity to figure out, when should we actually bring people together in person? What we found is that a lot of our training programs and learning programs, we've been able to maintain them in a virtual environment. So at the same time, though, there's Zoom fatigue. And so when do we bring people together? And that's a question we're all going to be asking ourselves next year when we go into our studios, which is going to be the second half of next year.
It's harder, right? Because just my personal experience is I found the meetings that require collaboration, whether it's product development, the innovation stuff, we're looking at where are we, where are the areas, opportunities for us to innovate. I've really struggled to have those conversations virtually with the team. And then when we walk into the office, we now basically what we do, just so you know, we do Monday, Wednesday, Friday from the office. That's before COVID. I mean, before we were on a second lockdown in the UK, just for context, we're not doing it now. And then Tuesday, Thursdays, we work from home. But but those days, the Wednesday, the Monday, Wednesday, Friday, most of those days are just spent collaborating. You don't have to be on those days, but we all agreed we'll try it out. And the idea is to spark the energy in the room. You know, it's just I don't know. I don't know about you, but I haven't been able to replicate that on a Zoom call.
No, absolutely right. I even though you could have energy maybe on a Zoom call, it's just not the same, to your point, as being there like physically in the room with people. And you know, another example is team effectiveness, right? We have a team effectiveness toolkit at Dropbox. We do Enneagram and Insights and StrengthsFinder and a bunch of different tools that we use for teams. And we've been able to do a lot of those virtually. I've just run a couple Enneagram sessions in the past month or so virtually for 2-3 hours, and it works, but it's not the same. And especially if you've got a team that's, I don't know, working through building trust, let's say, and you really want to be in the room with somebody else, see their body language.
That's a good point you made. The micro, the facial expression, the body language, all of that, that's something you really miss. Because especially if you've got like 10 people on the screen and it's like 10 small video feeds, you can't tell the reaction of that person or how they're feeling, or the fact that their kid's crying in the background or or whatever it may be. It's really hard to gauge that.
Very hard. The emotional cues, or when somebody gets really vulnerable in a meeting and suddenly just changes the energy or the dynamic in the room. It's just even more powerful when you're, you know, physically present, as we all would agree. So I think team effectiveness will be one of the things that we sort of double down on in person. I think certain leadership programs will be something that we design for in-person portions of that experience. The other thing people really miss is the random bumping into a colleague in the hallways in an office, where you spark up a conversation and then suddenly maybe you realize there's a synergy and you can work together on a project, and people are really missing that. And you can't really recreate that at all in a virtual environment. We also had just launched a LMS system just this year, just in June.
Who are you using for that?
Fuse Universal. It's actually a UK company. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I've come across them. I was just surprised you said that, because I just, you're a UK company and you're all the way, you know, just didn't. Yeah. Okay. That was a pleasant surprise.
You know, I mean, not to diss any other LMS providers, but some of them can be a little bit uninspiring, let's just say. I mean, they work really well. At the same time, they're sort of like traditional. They haven't changed a lot over the years. And what we found with Fuse is they're attempting to create more of a exciting, it's modern, sort of interactive social dynamic, and along with all the other training kind of baseline stuff that you need. So the issue, though, is that we only launched it in June. So we didn't have a lot of runway for having adoption of the LMS across the company before COVID hit. So we really had to not only sort of onboard this new system, get adoption of it, but also start to design our programs to be blended. So to use the e-learning and the digital learning to basically supplement our live. We do a lot of our stuff is live, just workshop based, you know, hour-long, 2-hour, 3-hour workshops. We had, for example, a 2-day boot camp that was live for new managers. It's a live experience. And we couldn't do 2 days over Zoom, right? So we had to basically redesign that entire program. So I'm happy to say that it's forced us to, and I would say a lot of people would agree with this. It's sort of forced the educational, not only the educational system that all of our kids go to, but our own learning systems to be very optimized for learning in async and synchronous experiences. And I think that's just we're gonna get better at it and better at it. And I think that'll help our audience, our learners, learn even better.
I'm sure you probably don't have less of a challenge trying to convince people why the value and why in this environment. They're like, this is the only way. Whereas beforehand, there was, other ways of doing it. It's like, no, this is where the vast majority of the learning will take place outside of classrooms, traditional classroom based as well.
Exactly right. So now what we're trying to think about is so we've got all these programs, and I'm very proud of the programs that we put together at DropBox, because I feel it covers a lot of ground, from onboarding to employee development to all manager levels. We have different learning tracks for different levels of leaders. We do executive coaching, quite a bit of it. And now I'm really asking myself and the team, so what that we're doing all that? If somebody comes to one of our workshops, are they truly building capability? Are we so focused on the surveys after the workshop and the fact that we had 500 people attend this year? Or are we really going to hold ourselves accountable to the outcomes, the actual sustained behavior
What does
change?
that mean? Yeah, what does it mean for the business? Does it matter? Yeah.
That's a big question for us for next year. What are the levers that are going to truly drive capability? And it's actually a fairly complicated problem, because it's not only the learning programs, it's their manager, and it's the on-the-job experience, and it's other things within the company and the culture. But we're going to experiment with a few things next year.
Yeah. Do you have a way currently of measuring the performance? Because one of the questions we always get from our audience is measuring the ROI of learning and development. Like, is it constantly comes up all the time? How do you measure it with the data, et cetera, et cetera? Is that something how far are you along that journey? I appreciate you've just only implemented the LMS platform, but was part of using that platform the rich data that you could get back from that and link it back to business results? What does that look like?
Definitely. I mean, we want to get there. We're definitely not there yet. We're at the stage I think a lot of people would identify with, which is the smiley sheets after the workshop, right? Telling us that we did a good job and they were happy or not, and they're learning or not, etc. But that's not a true indicator, obviously. Like, whether somebody enjoyed a workshop doesn't mean they've actually applied it and have built behaviors. So we're looking at the Kirkpatrick model, and we're looking at, for some of our more senior executive coaching programs, we do have a bit more data around that, because you can ask them and you can get feedback through like 360 surveys and so on. You can start to see actual other people saying that this leader changed behavior. And
you're linking that directly back to their reviews, their annual reviews, or quarterly, however you do it. So it's very clear, measurable from attending workshop, delivering work, the feedback, and then here's the result, or no result, depending on how it went.
It's easier for senior leaders and coaching engagements. It's harder for workshop attendees, let's say.
Yes.
So what we're trying to do is, to get better about measuring it. And we're going to continue working on that over time. And the other thing we're doing is driving more lead indicators of behavior change. So what I mean by that is, we all would agree, like, coaching has been one of the most transformational sort of modalities for the last 10, 20 years. And it's because you get direct insights. Really good questions from a really good coach will help you develop self-awareness, develop an opportunity for a developmental objective, and then practice, right? Actual practice, trying out new things, and then reflection and ongoing conversations with that coach. And so that whole process of coaching, the problem is it's very expensive. A couple of things that we're trying to do is sort of democratize coaching throughout the organization. And not only coaching, but sort of democratize practice, if you will. Sort of start to integrate more practice opportunities, let's say, within the company through practice labs and learning circles and coaching pods, and ways that we can really scale coaching. Another way we're doing it is through a program called Coach's Corner, which Coach's Corner is simply that every employee, ultimately, we're sort of rolling it out right now, but ultimately the idea is every employee, ICs and managers, will have access to coaching. And you're stuck on an issue, or you're not sure where to go in your career, or you just want somebody else to talk to that's not HR and not your manager, and you get access to a coaching session. And this is something that I can't take credit for it. my friends at Shopify started this about 10 years ago, and they've been public about their learnings there. It's been a great program for them. And so we want to give that access to coaching to all of our employees. And then also just institute coaching and practice labs where people can just show up, practice a skill, and then pop out, rather than, an hour or 2 hours of slides and concept and frameworks. It's just more about practice, practice, practice.
How is this all managed and housed then? I'm an employee. I want access to that coaching. Where do I go? Is it like part of the LMS? Is it something standalone? How do you see and manage and measure what's taking place?
So as far as Coach's Corner, you would be able to go on our intranet, our binder site, and find a link, right, a tab for the coach's coaching program page and Coach's Corner, and it would tell you a little bit about it, and then you'd be able to go sign up right through there. And then we have Coach Logics, which is the tool that we use to basically go schedule it and track goals and all that good stuff. So that is just now getting rolled out, and we're starting to see pretty good adoption of it. The other challenging thing is, I mean, we have the luxury of Dropbox is about 2,800 employees. It's, maybe harder to scale than 300 employees, but much easier to scale than, let's say, if you're 100,000 employees, right? So what we have to do is build internal capacity, coaching capacity, to be able to handle this Coach's Corner program. So we're training coaches internally.
That's the biggest challenge, right, as well, because otherwise it gets super expensive if you're doing it externally. You need to build those coaches internally in the organization and scale it that way.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. So we're like calling all coaches basically. And some companies I've seen that'll do pure coaching have, I would consider, relatively low bar. So you sort of like anybody can just be a coach, and then they go through kind of some basic training maybe about how to ask good questions, and then off they go. I think there's a bit of a risk in that. I think I want to have a bit of rigor and a higher level of standard around the coaching. And so we put that in place. You have to have an ICF certification or a master's degree in the relevant experience. And then we also have another 10 hours of coach training that we put them through.
What are your thoughts about some of these companies now, not going to mention names, to have these kind of AI coaches, these kind of artificial, you probably know the companies I'm referring to. There's been a lot of research now that people also actually, some research recently talking about how people are more comfortable actually talking to AI, a chatbot or AI about their needs. And I've seen a lot of companies going in that direction. And also because it's scalable, right? So that's back to the point where, you can scale that, right? What are your thoughts about that?
I'm very intrigued by that. I do think I would be one that would say, I do think there's a niche for that. And I would say that it's not going to replace all coaching, but there is a niche for it. And it's probably maybe in more junior managers or, certain populations. And I think that we haven't tested out any yet, but I'm very, very intrigued by it. And I think there's a space. I mean, even David Peterson, who is sort of like the director of Google's coaching program, has publicly stated, along with one of his colleagues, David Goldsmith, they run some coaching training. And what they're saying is, like, we have to amplify the coach capability and increase and up-level coaches' capabilities, because AI is coming and AI is going to start taking some of it over.
Mm-hmm. It is super helpful though. I can imagine, like, in my former role in sales, having that resource where I could, if I have a challenge, I could type it in and instantly get some resources or some feedback, and and some questions obviously directed directly at me for me to kind of ideate and think through it. That'd be very helpful, super helpful.
Yeah, what's intriguing about it, I find, is this concept of nudges.
Yes.
And nudges, the term that I first heard it was from company. What's the company called? Humu. And they're a company that was founded by Laszlo Bock, who's people ops at Google, and they popularized this concept of nudges. The idea is that you're going to get basically what you just said, like a just-in-time little nudge, something to try out that's based on intelligence, right? It's based on something that's already known about you, whether it's your certain style or it's your certain ways that you hold yourself back, and it's going to nudge you at the right time. That I think is valuable, because one of the things I struggle with workshop-based learning, let's say, is I'm going to offer a workshop. I'm going to offer, let's say, some random Wednesday, and you're going to show up, And then for the next few weeks, will you really have an opportunity to test that out or not? And that's not always, I wouldn't always say that the answer is yes,
Normally you
but
forget about it and there's something else, and then you don't end up doing anything with the information.
exactly.
It's such a shame, and I always struggle with this. Whenever I speak to leaders like yourself in this space, one of the questions I always ask is, this is a personal me being me asking for my own benefit, is that I consume so much content, but where I struggle is the execution. I just keep consuming, and at what point do I actually stop reading books and listening to podcasts and actually do the execution of that? Because there's one thing knowing it and there's another thing actually executing on it. And I really struggle with that. I still, even to this day, I love consuming. But I'm like, wait a minute, Chris, you need to take some time out to actually go ahead and implement your learning into the work.
The consuming is the fun part for a lot of people, right? It's like the dopamine hit of like a new nugget of knowledge, and it's so exciting. And I agree with that 100%. And the people that I found that really grow in their career and become super impactful as leaders and ICs are people who operationalize that learning. And
Yeah,
we have like a leader I can think of at DropBox who's like a pro at this, and he'll attend a workshop, and then he will instantly boil it down to like the 2 or 3 concepts, and then be trying it out in his team meeting like that next Monday, and having his team sort of like chewing on it and working on it. And it's really fascinating, but I find that's like less than 10% of leaders do that really well. But
tough. It's a
that's
skill you
what I wanna try
develop. Now I'm more conscious about it. So it's like the fact that I spoke to you about it always shows you that I'm conscious about it. And now I've become more self-aware of it, that whenever I do consume a piece of content, whatever it may be, I make I actually will schedule a time for me to go ahead and execute on it. Because if I don't, I'll just get distracted by this new shiny thing that's super interesting, and nothing ever happens.
yeah,
As well. Yeah.
exactly. And I find some I'm very intrigued lately by this concept of deliberately developmental organizations, DDOs, which is popularized by the book And Everyone Culture by Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy. And it's basically this idea that you're running experiments. Let's say you attend that workshop and you learn a new concept, and now you're going to run an experiment for the next 90 days, trying out a couple of the concepts. But you're also going to link it right back into the business objective that you're working on. And then it becomes sort of like learning and the business are intertwined and just as important. And the learning that you gain in your own sort of self-awareness and self-development amplifies the business outcomes and accelerates the outcomes. And so people that are doing this well are finding that out. And I'm very intrigued by that,
Yeah.
because I
In the
sort
name.
of, yeah, the learning guy, I feel like I don't want to be like this sort of like the decentralized learning team that you're only going to learn when you come to our workshops. I think learning is a part of showing up at work and being an employee. And I think the employees who really, I think, are happiest at work are also the ones that are growing and learning.
100%. And it's in the name, right? You have to be deliberate about it, and that's the difficult part
Yeah.
of doing it. And that sometimes frustrates me. Over the years, I've hired employees and been like, "Why don't you have a first for learning? what have you learned this week?" And they're like, "What do you mean? What have I learned this week?" I'm like super annoyed about it. I've got obviously come a long way since then as well. But I love if that can become. We spoke about Ray Dalio, right? That
Yeah.
becomes part of the culture of learning, right, in the business as
That's
well, where when you're constantly doing that. It's a good reminder for me that I need to do that more often with the team and link it directly back to the business and the deliverables, and have those 90 days to work on it. And if I get into a rhythm of keep doing that, then I can only imagine the value that's going to come from it.
Yeah. And Ray Dalio and Bridgewater Associates is one of the examples in the book that I mentioned, In Everyone Culture. And they are just very open and transparent.
Mhm.
You can give feedback to anybody in the company. And there's a famous story of Ray Dalio getting feedback from a brand new employee about how he ran a meeting ineffectively. And, it was, that's, you can do that. And it's confronting for some people to have that kind of level of feedback, but they're really, they try to not make it personal. And ultimately it's about the best ideas and sort of like creating a culture of innovation where
Mm.
you can just give like, hey, I would do it differently. Here's how I would do it. Open debate and discussion and sort of healthy conflict is really important. And that's an important thing. I feel like also a lot of people-centric organizations, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, they feel like it's attacking like this kind of direct feedback. It's not about the person, it's about the idea itself. And so creating like psychological safety and experimentation and sort of like this healthy debate is really important.
Yeah. It starts at the top though, right? If Ray Dalio responded really negatively to that, it probably wouldn't happen again. So I realize it needs to start with, it needs to be demonstrated by all of the leaders throughout the organization for people to realize, even in our small team of 8 people here, that when we had some new starters join and they hear some of the junior members give me feedback, there's an initial shock that you can see on their face, and it makes me smile quite a lot because they're like, what? You can tell they've worked in businesses like we all have listening right now. We've all worked for those managers and those leaders that if you came to them in the way we're talking about and gave them that feedback, it wouldn't end well.
Oh no, yeah, there's a target on your back, after that.
Exactly, right. Whereas it's the complete opposite now. It's like, what's the opportunity cost of not saying anything? And I think
That's right.
that's more what I think about now with the team, and that's why I explain it. What we're doing ourselves such a disservice by not telling and not speaking up and not saying it, even if it's a wrong, even if there's no bad idea, even if it doesn't work out that way and we still continue with the same plan, at least the voice is heard. And some of our best innovations and ideas in our small business that actually got us through COVID and survived, unlike many others in our space, were because of those conversations.
Absolutely. One of the things that you're saying is there's this sort of like cultural shift that needs to happen because we've moved from this hierarchical sort of way of doing corporations to more of a lot of organizations are becoming flatter, and everybody wants to do feedback well. And I think one of the ways to normalize it that I found helpful is that everybody's working on something, and let's just make it explicit. So I'm practicing this thing around developmental OKRs, meaning along with your quarterly business objectives and like OKRs are objectives and key results, right?
Mhm.
Goals. Along with all your business OKRs, you're going to have a developmental OKR, and you're going to share it with the team. And it sort of just normalizes that everybody's working on something. And now I know what you're working on, and I can give you feedback in that area if it would be helpful after a meeting or something. And it starts to normalize this idea and depersonalizes it a little bit. And so that's, I think, that's what they do at Bridgewater and other companies. And I think
It's a good
that's
point
an
because we don't
interesting
normally
way.
share that, right? Like when we get our OKRs for the year, we normally, because a lot of them are seen as negative, right? So there's this negative connotation to it, so you don't share it. Like Chris, you get better at giving feedback, for example, which was one of mine. I remember early on when I became a manager, I thought I was doing a great job, like we all do, until you get the feedback from everyone else. But I wouldn't share that necessarily with my colleagues and team. You wouldn't, would you? Like most people, maybe just most people wouldn't.
You would, because it was sort of seen as like you're not sort of living up to your potential, Chris, right? Like it. I mean, that was kind of the underlying assumption is like, oh, a feedback, and also it's tied in a lot of corporations to your pay, right? Usually you get feedback during your performance review,
Mhm.
and it's like tied to your pay, and so it's really high stakes, and everybody's always nervous about it. So it's like trying to decouple. These are the companies that are going like raterless, right? Where they're trying to get away from performance ratings and go more toward just regular developmental conversations,
Mhm.
which is one of the things we're doing at Dropbox. And so along with that, you sort of decouple the feedback and the development from your pay. I think that helps.
I think people that have been most affected in the challenges is being a leader and a manager during this time. The frontline managers having to deal with a lot, not just the work, but the personal, the link between work and life are one and the same. And we're also seeing ourselves as not say counselors for our teams, but we're having conversations in fields and areas that sometimes be very uncomfortable and we're not really prepared for. So how are you driving manager capability and helping support them through this time?
Yeah, no, it's really, really important. And I can only imagine how tough it's been for some newer managers because typically managers are promoted into a manager role because you're really good at your IC job, right? You're good at your craft. And now we're going to give you a team, and that's a whole new skill set. So we have a program called Startup where we're helping managers build capability around emotional intelligence, situational leadership, feedback, understanding their own style through things like Enneagram and Insights, which is a psychometric assessment. It's a cohort program, so they get to hear about other people who are also struggling or
That's
doing well.
good, because they're like, I'm not alone.
I'm not
It's not
alone.
just me, because that really helps.
That's so much of it, right? Like, I just want to know that I'm not the only one who's having a challenging time. So there's a bit of that. And then this in the COVID sort of reality, we've also really been doubling down on empathy and connection. It's so important for managers just to start a one-on-one, asking, their team member how it's going, and like truly genuinely checking in and forming some connection with the team member who's maybe a single parent at home juggling two kids and distance learning. That empathy muscle is not easy. It really takes practice, and you have to be genuine and to be able to check in with somebody, and maybe even to the point where you may get some additional support for that employee through, we have Modern Health, which is a new partnership where you have access to counseling sessions or coaching sessions. Or maybe you might need to adjust the goals a little bit mid-quarter. Like, the goals are too overwhelming and you have to adjust to this new reality. Another thing is like being more outcome focused, not necessarily you've got to be at your desk 9 to 5 in the traditional sense, but let's define a set of outcomes for the quarter. You're going to just design your schedule in a way that works for you. And then I'm going to give you feedback and support along the way and get to those outcomes. So it's really—
Have you given managers discretion about that now? Have you handed over not the reins, but have you given your managers the discretion to make those decisions about what that looks like in terms of exactly what you just described, in terms of customizing and personalizing, which is really the thing we're hearing for the last 8 months, is personalizing work for everyone, given their own circumstances and situations?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've put forward is this idea of core collaboration hours, which means that the recommendation is between 9 and I think 1 o'clock, plus or minus, is going to be a core collaboration hours. What does that mean? That means that's the time when you're going to be doing meetings. That's the time when you're going to be doing any kind of project ideation, project collaboration meetings, etc. And then the rest of the day is for your personal either reflection time or deep work, creative work, or like banging out a certain deliverable or whatever you might need to do. And that notion, though, is really new for people. And it's also hard when you're a distributed company in different time zones, right? Because my core collaboration hours in the West Coast are, Chris, probably quite different. My collaboration hours are your dinner time, right? So it's like we have to figure that out and sort that out on a team level. But that's one thing that we're trying out. And that's actually going to be that's in our virtual first toolkit that we just published. And that's going to be something we're experimenting with.
Mm-hmm. One thing we haven't spoke about, which I'd love to hear your opinion on what's working, is how are you communicating all of these different programs, initiatives? What have you seen that works best?
Very tricky, because at DropBox, there is a lot going on. Any given month, you're going to have, an ERG, let's say, will have a whole list of offerings for employees for that month, which are just amazing different offerings. We have a Truth and Reconciliation series that was published by our DEI team. It's been amazing. And then all of our programs, all the learning programs. So it's a lot of I wouldn't call it noise, because it's all good stuff. It's just a matter of you have to sift through it to get to like what's most relevant for me right now. One of the ways we do it is our startup program that I mentioned for new managers. I almost call it mandatory. I mean, it's not opt-in. It's like you're going to get the invite. You're going to get invited to it. Your manager is going to be made aware that you're in the program and give support. So that's one of the only programs we do it that way, because that's such an important population for us. Our other workshops are more elective, opt-in type workshops. And so it's just a regular drumbeat of emails that go out to employees about here are the workshops this month. And we use our HR business partners sometimes to socialize those opportunities. Executive coaching is easier because there's certain people get access to it, and it's a very, sort of sought after engagement. So people tend to sign up for it. Employee development's trickier. Those are our IC programs, where it's just you can join a workshop on a variety of different capabilities. But one of the things we're going to actually try, so this virtual first thing for next year, such an important initiative for our employees, and we really want to get virtual first right. So this is our whole new people strategy, and we want to do it right. And so we're going to different quarterly themes that we're going to do. So a business leader let's say in our engineering organization or any of our organizations, is going to get an email that they can then send to their entire org that's going to say, here are all the learning opportunities related to virtual first this month or this quarter. Then there's going to be a series of either workshops or digital learning or even what we're calling self-serve plays, which are like basically playbooks that team leaders can run with their teams on certain things like team health and the core collaboration hours. So there's going to be more air cover, I would say, and more awareness. It's more of a marketing campaign, if you will, around these things. And so I think that's going to help us drive focus and adoption.
Bit of a random question, but has this changed the setup within your own team and the way you work together? Given the fact we've gone this shift to fully virtual, is there a different types of skills now that you're bringing into the team that you would perhaps wouldn't have done before? For example, video editors, or as a really random example, but content creators, because you're having to build content around these pieces. Is that changed the way you operate?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I would say the structure of the team has stayed the same, but the capabilities around content development, to your point, we've had to put some focus there. So for example, on the digital learning side, we have brought on tools like Beyond, which is basically like video animation, and then Articulate and Rise courses, like Rise format within Articulate. Those are a couple of areas that we've built some capability on our team to be able to deliver. We have the fortune of having internal video editors in DropBox.
Nice.
That we can tap to do, like mashup videos and different kind of fun videos. So that we've had that luxury. We haven't had to do that on our team, but yeah, I'd say those authoring tools have been important. And but we found that also like learning design is really important, because you need to be able to design an optimal blended learning experience, meaning a little bit of pre-work maybe in digital, on e-learning, and then the live facilitated workshop has to then be very interactive, right, and very sort of practice focused. People don't want to show up and get just pummeled with slides for an hour. So we have to redesign that, and the facilitation has to be really tight, and then the follow-up has to be good through either e-learning or some kind of accountability mechanism.
And you're right, even that is his own new set of skills that exist, and creating those learning pathways within the LMS. I'm sure it takes a bit of time and to configure and actually make it a very good user experience, because predominantly that's where most people are going to spend their time. Where do you see us moving forward? And I don't want to throw out a too lofty question of what's the future of learning, because that's a big question, but where do you see us kind of moving, 3-5 years from now? Where do you think the space is going to be?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that I've touched on some of it, like the learning and the flow of work, I think is this really intriguing concept, which is how do you integrate learning into the flow? And I think there's a few different channels, some that we talked about, like this idea of having a developmental OKR, where it's just top of mind that you're going to be focusing on your own development throughout the quarter, along with your other goals, and then weaving in the feedback capability across the company into that, and as modeled by the most senior leaders. I think that's a really important piece. I think this idea of normalizing mistakes is gaining in popularity, where you want to fail fast and learn from your mistakes, and actually publicly be explicit about the actual mistakes and what you learn. Celebrated even. Yes, exactly right.
I'm seeing now, it's just like for my team, I mean, it's just Novartis, Simon, who's the chief learning officer at Novartis. Every year they have an award for the biggest almost success. So I don't know the exact name of it, but there's an award, a trophy, that when they have the award ceremony every year, obviously everyone's accepting their awards for all the great things they've done. They have a special award for the biggest project that could have been, that perhaps didn't work out, but they celebrate that and everyone gets behind it, and they celebrate with the same success, the same energy, same excitement, and some of the best innovations, and it builds that culture of curiosity, that culture of innovation. As well. I love seeing that.
That's a learning program, if you think about it. That's a learning initiative, and that doesn't have to come from L&D. That can come right from the CEO, and that's I think really exciting. Is where L&D can sort of enable the executives and the leaders to integrate learning throughout the company with examples like that, or expanding coaching access to everyone. Is another area that, of course, I've shared that I'm excited about. So it's really just integrating it all and experimenting and tying it all to the business outcomes. And I think that's really, an exciting place to be. And it sort of decentralizes learning a little bit.
Mhm.
And, it's not easy, but it's certainly worthwhile.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever been a more exciting time to be in this space, to be honest. And HR is, despite all the doom and gloom, there's so much exciting things that have come out of this, and in many ways, it's kind of leapfrogged us years forward into some of the plans and innovations that we kind of everyone knew was important, but this was sort of the catalyst to kickstart some of those programs and initiatives to push forward as well. And this given everyone a real learning moment throughout all of this. All the things that we said beforehand that we can't do that, it's impossible for everyone to work from home, and we've debunked so many theories in the workplace around learning, just the way we work in general. That yeah, it's super exciting time to be in this space. That before we wrap up, thanks so much for taking the time out to share your experience with our listeners. It means a lot. I appreciate that. If there was sort of one parting piece of advice you'd want to give to other leaders in your field, even maybe some that are kind of new into the role, what advice would you give to them? And then where's the best place for people to connect with you if they want to reach out and say hello?
Adopt a design thinking mindset, a sort of product development mindset with all things that you do, meaning the very first thing you pilot is never as good as the thing is a year later, right? And the idea is that you've tested an idea and then you've built it out over time. And I think that notion, one, it just gives you a feeling like you can get started on a bunch of different things right away. You can just pilot a few things and then scale them over time, and it takes the pressure off of needing to get everything perfect right away.
It's not a reality. Yeah.
And that's just, yeah, I mean, and it's tough for somebody new who's sort of trying to figure out how do I do the perfect L&D program. And so just launch, get started, and then iterate. And some things work, some things don't work. Figure that out as quickly as you can, and double down on the things that do work. And then gaining buy-in. I think it's really important to have relationships across the business with different leaders and just different functional people that will be your learning champions, and that also you can learn from them. Like, how are you? Because it's not like L&D should be the only organization or the only people who are like the learning geeks in the company. Obviously, there are other people who we can learn from in the business. And so like meeting and building relationships with those people is really important. And then if people want to get in touch with me, you can reach me at, my email is justinm@dropbox.com, JUSTIN, M as in McSharry. And I always welcome chatting with people and just staying connected and mutual learning. And so I welcome that.
Amazing. Are you also on LinkedIn as well? That'd be a good place to
Yes.
you.
Yep. LinkedIn's another spot. You can find me there, Justin McSharry.
Fantastic. Well, look, thanks so much for taking the time out to join us. I'll let you get on with your day. My day's just ending. You're just beginning where you are. And for everyone listening, if you enjoyed the episode, please like, comment, share, tag in your learning colleagues, any colleague that you feel would gain value from this episode. Apart from that, enjoy the rest of your day, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Chris. And thanks for doing this podcast.